Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar. In lecture number 4, we will continue our discussion on the legal research design. But in this lecture, we will discuss the research design of a socio-legal research or non-doctrinal research. And with this, we understand that what are the different components of the socio-legal research, and with this we will also see what is social survey method. Let us see what are the topic we are going to cover in this topic. So, in this lecture, we are going to discuss socio-legal research, non-doctrinal research, legal research design in socio-legal studies, component of socio-legal research design, components of socio-legal research design, title of research paper, project or dissertation. Then we will see that what are the introduction or the research problem which the researcher has to be write down in introduction, formulation of hypothesis, types of hypothesis in socio-legal research, literature review, objectives of study, methodology of sections, types of data needed and methods of data collection. And with this, we will also discuss social survey research method and conclusion. Let us begin with the socio-legal research or non-doctrinal research. In our third lecture, we broadly understand the research design of doctrinal research. Now, what is the socio-legal research or non-doctrinal research? Though we have a very brief discussion about this, the doctrinal research and non-doctrinal research in our lecture number 2. Now, let us understand in detail what is the socio-legal research, what is the non-doctrinal research, and what is the component of socio-legal research design if the researcher want to do the socio-legal research. See, so in a non-doctrinal legal research, the researcher try to investigate through empirical data. So in this kind of research, the investigation is through empirical data. Empirical data means he will go to the field, he will collect the data, and with investigating this empirical data, he tried to know how law and legal institution either they affect or they mold human attitudes and what impact on society they create. So basically, non-doctrinal research is purely a field study, or we can say that this is a empirical study where the researcher actually go into the field to collect data to see that how the law work in the society and what is the impact of the law actually for the society. See, non-doctrinal research involve study of social impact of law. So, what is the social impact of a law, or we can say how the law is working in the society, or what is the primarily the objective with which the law was enacted in the society, whether all these objectives are fulfilled after enactment of the law or not. So, we can say that non-doctrinal research or socio-legal research answer certain question. Now, what kind of question this research will address? This research will address are laws and legal institutions are serving the needs of the society. This research will answer are the laws they are suited for the society in which they are operating. So, this research try to understand that what forces in the society have influenced shaping or reshaping of the particular set of law or norms in the society. And with this, sometimes the socio-legal research or non-doctrinal research also try to understand that are law properly administered and enforced, or do they exist only in the statute books, that actually there is implementation of the law in the society, whether the mechanism is working accurately for the implementation of the law in the society. So, all these aspects has been covered by a researcher if he or she pursue the socio-legal research or the non-doctrinal research. Sometimes the factors, if they are responsible for the poor or non-working of the law, they are also addressed by the researcher. So, what are the factors that influenced the adjudicators, means the courts or the administrative agencies in interpreting the law and administrating the law, is also sometime the objective of this research. So, for whose benefit a law is enacted, and are they are using it, have they intended legislative targets, whether benefited from the law, if not, what are the reason for that? All these questions are actually addressed in the non-legal, non-doctrinal research. So, a legal researcher undertaking non-doctrinal research, he take either some aspect of the law or he takes some aspect of the people, and sometimes he pursue research to the to know that how law is regulated in the society. Such a research undertaking compared to the doctrinal legal research is much broader and in the question which are involved there. Non-doctrinal research or socio-legal research, it address the numerous question in a very wide way. It is not confined only to get the answer of a one or two questions. Because this research has been conducted in the field, so researcher want to know that whether the research, whether the law is actually implemented properly in the society or not. So, let us see that what is the research design in a socio-legal research. When we see the research design in a socio-legal research, you can see that socio-legal research, it is the structure within which a research is conducted. So, basically the research design is a kind of outline. This is a kind of the structure, and within that structure the researcher intended to do from choosing a topic, formulating the research problem, framing the hypothesis, and then choosing the tools or the techniques to collect the data, and with this at the final stage the researcher try to analyze and interpret the data, and finally researcher come with some conclusion and with some finding. So, if we talk about that, is there any kind of a specific format for the non-doctrinal research or a socio-legal research? No, there is no specific format for the socio-legal research. It absolutely depend on the researcher that what type of study he want to do, what kind of a social issue he want to address in his study, and whether that study or that kind of a social issue needs specific kind of a tool or not, needs specific kind of a format or not. Hence, there is a no specific format for the research design in the socio research. So, in legal social sciences research literature, the term research design is widely used in terms which refers to a plan of study to be carried out for whatever purpose the researcher want to achieve. And therefore, the researcher has to take a number of decisions before preparing research design. Now, he has to be see what he want to study. He has to be see what will be the purpose of his study. He has to decide that how I will pursue my research. He has to be define, or he has to be confined his study to any particular geographical area. He has to be decide that what will be the sample of his study. He has to be see that whether the respondent will be addressed with some questionnaire, or he will interview them, or he will simply observe their activity in that particular geographical area or in that particular specific conditions belongs to that particular problem. So, researcher has to take a number of decisions before preparing design such as, right. Now, let us see what are the components of the socio-legal research. As we have already discussed the different components of the doctrinal research, the component of the socio-legal research to some extent are same, but because this is a field study, this is an empirical study, that is why the hypothesis is one of the very important component of the socio-legal research. Because researcher has to go to the field and he has to collect the data, that is why the tools or techniques the researcher will use is again a very important component of the socio-legal research design. because he has to be collect the data. That's why the what method he will use to collect data is again is a very, very important aspect of the socio-legal research. So you can see on your screen that in non-doctrinal research or in a socio-legal research, it generally include the title of the research project. He decide first that what should be his title of his research project or a research paper, dissertation, whatever he is working for. Secondly, the introduction is again is a very, very important part of the component of socio-legal research, because and here he has to be explain briefly the nature of the problem he is going to address, the research question he want to address or he want to get answer of the research questions, and with this hypothesis or researchable questions, then with this literature review, objectives of the study, methodological section, and then type of data and methods of data collection, socio-culture context of the study and place of geographical area which is covered by the study, then type of sampling which is to be used, and data coding and analysis, and then finally the significance and contribution of the research proposal is a very, very important component of the socio-legal study. Now let us understand that why the title of research project is important. See, the research title is a very essential element of the research writing, because it serves a very concise and a clear summary of the research topic and its finding. Let us see, for example, women empowerment in India, colons, Indian laws vis-a-vis a societal setup in India. See, this is the title of a research article. So here researcher, he give title to his research article, Women Empowerment in India, Indian laws vis-a-vis societal setup in India. And this title maybe is more effective than if we give a title to Women Empowerment in India and laws. So the second one, it has not served the purpose what he want to study, but the first title, Women Empowerment in India, so researcher want to discuss in his article the empowerment of a woman in India, and in reference to empowerment of a woman in India, he want to discuss what are the Indian laws, and in relation to that, what is the societal setup in India, whether the women are actually empowered in India, whether they are feeling empowered in India, especially in the social setup, especially in the social background where they grown up, where they get married or where they get education. So all these aspects the researcher will cover, and the first title of his research article give us an idea that researcher want to discuss the Indian laws we have for the empowering women. Researcher want to discuss that societal setup of India for empowering the woman in reference to the laws we have for the empowerment of the women in India. So therefore, it is very vital that the title is well written. Now this is very important, title is well written, and when it is said that it is well written, it accurately reflect the content of the research. Now what does it mean? It means that there should be no ambiguity, there should be no double meaning, there should be no vagueness in the title of the research article or dissertation or a research project. So what is essential? It is very essential to keep title brief, then informative, and then which can be easily understood by the readers. So the three things or 3 points which are important while framing the article, that it should be well written, it should be accurately reflect the content of the article, then it should be essentially keeping in mind the information which the researcher want to give in his article or in a thesis or in a research project, and with this it should be easily understood by the readers of this article, that in this article in the researcher want to discuss this particular aspect of the woman empowerment. So additionally, a well written article can also the researcher's credibility and expertise. Now these two terms are very important, because it mentions that a well written article can also the researcher's credibility and expertise in the field of study. What does it mean? It means that a researcher has reviewed the literature well. He has read the matter related to his research article, and on the basis of that he precisely and in a very concise manner framed the title of his research project. Second is introduction. Now, in introduction of the socio-legal research, the research problem or the research questions are addressed by the researcher. So, what is introduction? We can say this is a brief explanation of what researcher propose. For what? To research why the research is of value, how researcher propose to go about it. So, introduction in a socio-legal research should summarize research problem, research statement, motivation behind taking the research topic, and what is the original approach in a way, and researcher should communicate in the introduction of the topic that why this research is important and what is the utility of this socio-legal research for further enhancement and understanding of the socio problem or the social issue. So, the introduction of this research socio-legal research design, it should be introduce the research idea. Now, what is the idea behind the research? What is the idea behind the research? And so, what does it mean that if it designed? So, what does it mean? It means that the research design should introduce the research idea. Here, research idea mean that research design in introduction portion introduce the research problem. It talk about what are the research question researcher want to answer in this research. So, even the introduction should be very precise and it must cover all the relevant information, but this relevant information must be in a very concise manner. It should be very brief because this is an introduction, this is not a very detailed portion because this is a part of a research proposal. So, in toto, there is no specific method of writing an introduction. But the major component of introduction is this introduction should give idea what are the research problem. The introduction should give idea that what are the motive behind taking this research problem, what are the research questions, what will be the component of this research. So, this research introduction will properly give an outline of the matter with which the research is concerned. So, researcher should identify the basic problem if he is working on any social issue or the research question which he want to or which he intended to study. So, the proposed research, it involves field study. So, it should be specified what type of data will be needed to complete this research and what methods or technique the data collection will be used. Now, this is the third point is a very important formulation of hypothesis or researchable question. See, we have already discussed this in our previous lecture that hypothesis is a tentative assumption which is made in order to test its logical or empirical consequences. Give your attention on this tentative assumption. It means this statement which is made by the researcher while framing the hypothesis or in the formulation hypothesis is tentative assumption. This is the tentative statement which may be proved, which may be disproved when the researcher collect the data and give the interpretation of data, right. So, research question or a research hypothesis is typically required in socio-legal research. I just want to remind that when we discuss about the doctrinal research, there we discuss that the hypothesis, research hypothesis is not mandatory or compulsory for doctrinal research. But so far the research is socio-legal research where the researcher has to collect data, he has to address some social issue and he want to approach to the people to understand that what kind of problem they are facing. So, in this research, the researcher has to collect the data. We can say this is a quantitative type of research where the researcher has to collect information, with the help of different tools or techniques, and that is why research question or hypothesis is required in socio-legal research. Researcher cannot pursue his socio-legal research without framing the hypothesis. The hypothesis need to be framed in the socio-legal research. So, a research question in a socio-legal research is a statement. Now, this statement in the form of research question, it describes the specific problem. Mean the question is it describes a specific problem or issue that researcher aims to address through the research. We can say hypothesis is a tentative statement that proposes a potential explanation or solution to the research question. So, research questions and hypotheses, they are important part of the socio-legal research. So, the hypothesis also help to guide the selection of research methods. So, once the hypothesis is framed, researcher will easily understand, or he can then finalize that what tool is required to collect the data for that specific problem, issue or the statement which he has framed in the hypothesis. So, this hypothesis, it helps to guide the selection of research method, data sources, and it also allow the researcher to develop a logical and coherent argument or conclusion which is based on the research finding. That is why the formation of hypothesis is a very important part of socio-legal research. So, hypothesis is commonly used in socio-legal research and it is used only to test a specific theory or whatever the predictions the researcher has made in the form of hypothesis, and the hypothesis is focused or it should be quantitative study. Now, let us understand what is the important point while researcher is framing his hypothesis. What is important point the researcher has to be keep in mind while he is framing his hypothesis. So, whenever the hypothesis is framed for the socio-legal research design, there are certain points which the researcher has to be keep in mind. The very first is independent and dependent variables. So, independent and dependent variables, it should be specified. So, in social research, hypothesis is usually defined as a testable statement. Means this statement can be testified after the data is collected and after the inferences of the data. Then the hypothesis will be tested. So, variables are either explained in terms of independent and dependent variable. Now, let us understand that what is an independent variable. Independent variable is presumed active or casual variable. This is variable that brings about a change in the another variable. It means that dependent variable is always depend on the independent variable. So, the variable that is changed is called as dependent variable. Let us take one example. You can see on your screen, for example, juvenile who are well looked after by their parents will be less likely to use drug. Now, this is a statement that juveniles who are well looked after. So, juveniles well looked after by their parents are they will be less likely to use drugs. It means that in this statement, the parental care is the independent variable. Parental care is independent variable, and using drugs is dependent variable. So, in this example, whether juvenile will use drug, it will depend upon the parental attachment and care. If researcher see that parents are taking a very good care of the child, or if the child is much attached, emotionally he is very much attached to the parents, the chances of the child to taking drug will automatically reduce. It means that parental care here is independent variable, and the involvement of the child of taking drugs will be certainly depend on the parental care. So, what does it mean? Parental care is independent variable and taking drug is depend upon the behavior and attachment of the child with the parental care. So, the hypothesis in this example is very much clear. Why? Because it shows that if juvenile are emotionally attached to their parents, yes, if they are well looked by the parents, they will less likely to use harmful drugs. So, in this example, parental care is independent variable and using drug is the dependent variable. Now, I am sure that now you understand that how the independent variable and dependent variable, they are connected with each other and how dependent variable is depend or it rely on the independent variable. Now, see second thing, hypothesis should be so stated that it can be verified or refuted. Yes, again this is very important point. Hypothesis should be testable. If hypothesis cannot be verified until deduction can be made from it which are capable of empirical verification. Now, it should be capable of being proved or refuted. It should be capable. Now, we have to keep this thing very carefully in our mind that hypothesis should be stated that it can be verified or refuted. So, hypothesis should be in capacity, it should be framed that it should be capable of being proved or refuted or disapproved. Now, let us see one more example. See, the hypothesis states that juvenile should be attached to their parents. Should be attached to their parents. What is it? Should be attached to their parents in order to reduce the incidence of delinquency. We should read it again. Hypothesis states juvenile should be attached to their parents in order to reduce the incidence of delinquency. So, the statement on the surface might appear to be a hypothesis that juvenile should be attached to their parents in order to reduce the incidence of delinquency. So, it appears like it is a hypothesis because it indicates a relationship between the attachment of the parents and the drug use. But this statement, however, is not testable. Why so? Because the term should be, it is an evaluative phrase. This is evaluative phrase. So, whenever the researcher frame the hypothesis should or should not be has no place in the hypothesis. It has no place in the hypothesis. So, we have to be very, very careful while framing the hypothesis that we should not use should or should not. What should or should not? So, should or should not give a specific meaning to the statement, it automatically become evaluative, that it should be evaluative, that the juvenile should be attached to their parents in order to reduce the incidence of delinquency. Moving ahead, increased level of attachment means with the parents, that means that it reduces the tendency to take drugs by the children. The another important aspect while framing the hypothesis is concept and comparisons in hypothesis should be clearly stated. Now, again this is very important. Concept and comparison in a hypothesis should be clearly stated. So, if researcher want to compare, if you want to do certain kind of comparison and if you want to mention some concept, they should be clearly mentioned. Now, let us understand this with the help of one example. When researcher seeks to evaluate the truth, what he is trying to do? He is trying to evaluate the truth, and for that he implied in a concept or he tried to make a comparison. So, the hypothesis should clearly state it that he is trying to compare, he is going to compare or he is trying to give a comparative statement which he will either prove or disapprove with the findings. So, researcher, for example, teachers in schools have superior moral standards. Now, this is the statement. Teachers in schools, they have superior moral standards. Now, moral standard is a very vague and abstract concept. Now, moral standard, you cannot define the moral standard in a very precise or in a very specific words. So, here moral standard is a very vague and it is very abstract concept, and it has no definite meaning. Moral standard, you cannot give a definite meaning to moral standard. So, maybe for some people their attitude in a one particular respect, maybe that is a moral standard for them, and that is not equally applicable to the other group of people, and hence we cannot define moral standard in a very precise definition. It is, however, almost impossible to verify and test this statement, moral standard. So, what was the statement? Statement was that teacher in schools have superior moral standards. Now, here the hypothesis does not identify what? Any other group with which superior standard of a teacher can be compared. So, whether the researcher want to compare the moral standard of the teacher of a government school with the moral standard of the teacher of a private school, or whether the researcher want to compare the moral standard of the teachers of the school with the moral standard of the teachers of the university of the college, this is not clear. So, this statement does not give us an idea about that what kind of comparison the researcher want to do in research. So, this is the another important aspect that researcher has to be keep in mind while he is framing the hypothesis. Now, moving ahead, we will see that what are the different types of hypothesis. There are different types of hypothesis in socio-legal research. Now, social research literature shows that hypothesis can be framed in various ways. Yes, it can be, and how the hypothesis will be framed, it will certainly depending upon the purpose they seek to serve, the researcher want to serve. Now, let us understand there is one directional hypothesis, and this one directional hypothesis is also called the positive hypothesis. This is very important aspect to understand, because for the framing of hypothesis, one should know that what is the one directional hypothesis, what is the two directional hypothesis, what is the null hypothesis. So, let us begin with the positive or the one directional hypothesis. See, when the relationship between two variables or comparison between the two group is expressed in such a term as positive or negative, more than, less than, and the like, then we can say these hypotheses are referred to as directional hypothesis. Directional hypothesis. They are called positive, as I said, one directional, or sometimes they are also called the one-tailed hypothesis. One-tailed hypothesis, they are the one-tailed hypothesis. One-tailed hypothesis. Let us understand this with the help of one example. So, this example on the screen, the lower the number of hours studying per week, the lower the grade at the end of the semester. I am reading this statement again. The lower the number of hours studying per week, the lower the grades at the end of the semester. Now, these can also be set in the form of if the statement said if the number of hours studying per week is low, the grade is also low. One directional hypothesis, it means the grade is also low. See, the grades of the students is depend on the number of hours he is studying. So, these are called directional hypotheses because they indicate the direction of the relationship between the variables. Why it is so? Because if the researcher he study complete week, he study 4 hours every day in a week for 7 days, it means the chances that he will get the more marks will definitely increase. So, the number of study increase, the possibility that the marks will increase will certainly rise. So, independent variable decrease in a particular way. If the study hours reduce, the marks will certainly reduce. If the study hour increase, the marks will automatically increase, and that is why the dependent variable also decrease in the same direction as the independent variable decrease. The hours of study decrease, the marks also decrease. The hours of study increase, the marks will also increase, and that is why this hypothesis is considered positive, because both variables co-vary in the same directions. They co-vary in the same direction. Let us take one more example. On your screen you can see the lower the number of hours studying per week, the lower the grades at the end of the semester. Now, if the number of hours studying per week is low, then grades are also low. See, these both are one directional hypothesis. These are the one directional hypothesis. Now, see, the second type of hypothesis, two directional hypothesis, and sometimes we also call it the two-tailed hypothesis. We also call them non-directional hypothesis. Now, let us see. If the researcher does not want to specify ahead of a time any directions, then two directional or two-tailed hypothesis may be formulated. And we will understand this also with the help of example. You can see in your screen, there is a relationship between hours studying and grades. What is the statement? There is a relationship between hours studying and grades. Now, in this example, the exact relationship remain unstated. The statement is there is a relationship between the hours studying and grade. Now, this is a statement. Now, what is exactly the exact relationship? This is remain unstated. Why so? Because in the example which we discussed in a one directional hypothesis, there the statement was if the number of study increase, the marks also increase. If the number of hours of study decrease, the grade also decrease. But see, this statement in two directional hypothesis simply said there is a relationship between the hours studying and grade. What kind of a relationship? If the student is studying 4 hours, whether he or she will get more marks, or if the student who is studying for 10 hours, whether he will get the less marks. What kind of a relationship is not clear in the statement. So, we can say that in this statement there is a relationship between hours studying and grades. So, in this example, what is missing? The exact relationship remain unstated, and then the possibility that more hours of study are related to higher grades or fewer hours of study are related to lower grade. This is left open. So, when this is left open, we call that there is no direction given. So, sometime we call these are the two directional hypotheses. We can say that this is a non-directional hypothesis. Now, non-directional hypothesis or two directional hypothesis, they are called the non-directional hypothesis because these hypotheses do postulate a relation or a difference. Yes, this is correct. They postulate relationship or a difference, but they provide no indication of the direction of these relationship. As the problem we discussed, that relationship between hours studying and grade, but it has not indicate the direction of these relationship or the differences, right. So, the reason of framing non-directional hypothesis is that though it may be assumed that there would be a significant relationship between the two variables, the researcher may not be able to say exactly whether the relationship would be positive or a negative or a more or less. Now, after the discussion on what are the one directional hypothesis, what is the two directional hypothesis, now let us understand that what is the difference between the positive or one directional hypothesis and two directional hypothesis or non-directional hypothesis. Let us see the positive or one directional hypothesis. Specify the expected direction of the effect. Now, this is correct. This is correct. This is one directional. This hypothesis specified the expected direction of the effect. So, if the researcher he want to pursue the research that the number of hours increase, the marks or grade will also be increased. Specify the expected directions. It is one tail because these are only focused on a one directions, and the one directional hypothesis, they are often based on a prior research or a theory. It means that researcher, while he reviewed the literature or while he studied the theory or the doctrinal, on the basis of that he framed his hypothesis, one directional hypothesis or the positive hypothesis. See, if there is a higher power to detect the specified direction. Now, again, the one directional hypothesis, there is the chances to detect the specified direction are much more in comparison to the two directional hypothesis, because in a two directional hypothesis the power is divided between the two directions. So, it is not clear, it is not sure by the it is not clearly described by the researcher. So, the power is divided into two directions, but in a one directional hypothesis there is a higher power to detect the specified direction, and then there is a less flexible possibility in exploring the alternate outcome in the one directional hypothesis. Now, let us see how the two directional hypothesis it differ from the one directional hypothesis. We already have had understood this with the help of the example, but see, two directional hypothesis does not specify the expected direction of the effect. So, two directional hypothesis, either this direction or this direction, this is not clear, it does not specify the expected direction of the effect. Again, this two-tailed hypothesis, it consider both positive and negative effect. So, the possibility is that if the student he study for 4 hours per day, increase the chances to get maximum marks. So, two-tailed hypothesis, it considered both positive and negative effects, and then this two directional hypothesis, it may lack prior knowledge or theoretical basis. Now, this is again very important aspect. If you compare with the one directional hypothesis, you realize there we discussed that there is a higher power to detect the specified directions, but because there is a lack of prior knowledge, there is the lack of theoretical basis which was not there in a one directional hypothesis, because one directional hypothesis is based on the prior research, it based on the theory or some doctrine, but here because there was a no prior knowledge or theoretical basis, and hence the possibility is more there that the statement is the hypothesis is two directional hypothesis. Then the power is divided between the both directions. As I said, the power is divided between both directions, and then in the two directional hypothesis, the chances, the flexibility is more there. For what? In considering the different outcome, and however, exploring the alternative outcome is not there, or the chances are very bleak in the one directional hypothesis. Then the third type of hypothesis is the null hypothesis. Now, these are used when researchers believe that there is a no relationship between the two variables. We call this is a null hypothesis. So, when the inadequate theoretical or empirical information to state a research hypothesis is there, the null hypothesis represent a theory that has been put forward either because it is believed to be true or because it is to be used as a basis of argument, but it has not been proved. So, even the null hypothesis is very important in some kind of research where the relationship is there, when there is a no relationship between the two variables, or when there is not much matter or adequate theoretical concept or aspect has been examined by the researcher. The another important component of the socio-legal research is literature review. Now, during the socio-legal research, researcher use the literature for what? To develop his or her knowledge of the chosen topic and to the research process in general. Then researcher do the literature review to understand the current state of academic knowledge within the chosen topic. So, the topic which he finalized, then what is the other aspect of that topic, he want to understand that, and that is why he has to be read lot of literature, the articles, the reference books or the journals, the magazines, the debate, the statutes, and that is why the review of literature is again very important component of a socio-legal design. Sometimes the review of literature also help the researcher to understand that what is the gap in knowledge that researcher will address. Sometime the review literature also ensure that researchers research question will not become too broad or narrow, So understanding existing research is the core of researcher study, and hence a good review of literature is very important because it makes the researcher understand what is the existing work in his or her chosen topic, what is the gap in his or her chosen topic, what is the possibility to do research in that particular topic. So all these uh, uh, aspects of a research is very, very important for researcher to understand, and literature review is contribute a lot in the framing of the title of the research, in understanding the gap of the research, in understanding where the law where there is a flaws in the law, to understand that what kind of the data researcher need to collect for the, to understand what kind of a tools researcher has to be used for the collection of data, to understand that who will be the respondent of his research, to understand that in what geographical area researcher want to pursue or want to collect his data. So the review of literature is a very, very important component of the socio-legal research. Now coming on the objective of the study. See, legal research may undertaken for a variety of purpose. That's true. Sometimes the objective of the legal research is to verify the old facts and understand the new facts. Sometimes the purpose of the socio-legal research is to analyze the empirical nature of the law and its relationship to the society. So when the researcher try to analyze the nature of the law and its society, it is only possible when the researcher actually went into the society, he met with the people and then try to understand that whether the law which is made for the betterment or for the protection of the people in the society is actually working for the betterment of the people or not. So objective of the socio-legal research is also analyze historical and contemporary or social of the. So the another objective of the socio-legal research is to analyze historical and contemporary of the social, economic and political factor which are leading to the development of the law and the legal process. So objective of the socio-legal research is also to develop a new legal research tool. Sometimes it also help to propound a new legal concept. Sometimes it also help to examine the operation of a law in formal context. For example, how the courts are working in informal context. For example, how the law offices are working, and sometimes an analysis of the experience of those which are affected by the process of law is also important objective of the socio-legal research. So sometimes the researcher examine what are the consequences of the new facts or new principle of law or judicial decision. Let us take one example. After the judgment on triple talaq by Honorable Supreme Court of India, where the Supreme Court of India pronounced the judgment that triple talaq is unconstitutional because it is violating the right of the human rights of the Muslim woman under Article 14 of the Constitution. Now researcher want to know or understand that what is the consequences of this judgment or this judicial decision of the Supreme Court. And for this, he framed the objective of this study that I will try to know from the Muslim women that they are actually satisfied with the judicial decision of the Honorable Supreme Court. They think the decision is reasonable and it is for the betterment of the Muslim women because it is actually violating the basic human rights of the Muslim woman. Now, this can be the objective of this study. So, the another thing which need to be discussed in the socio-legal research is what is the methodology of the socio-legal research. See, methodology, in methodology, the researcher should explain the methodology to be adopted in carrying out the study. And here the researcher has to be finalized what the type of data needed. So, for example, if I continue the example of that the researcher want to pursue a socio-legal research to know the opinion or the point of view of the Muslim women after the judgment of the, after the triple talaq judgment by the Honorable Supreme Court. So, he has to be decide that what type of a data is needed to complete this study. So, in a socio-legal study, the researcher should specify the type of data to be relied upon, so that he can find the answer to the research problem or research question. And for this, he will be in need that I have to be finalized whether I have go with the questionnaire, or should I send a Google form to the Muslim woman just to understand or to get responses, and on the basis of that responses he or she will get some kind of idea that actually whether the women they are happy with the triple talaq judgment by Honorable Supreme Court or not. Now, type of data is needed, certainly it is required in a socio-legal research. And what are the methods of the data collection? This is also important. So, for example, if we continue this example of the collection of data or information from the Muslim women after the triple talaq judgment, now here researcher has to be decide how could I proceed my research, how could I collect the information, should I go with the questionnaire, or should I go to interview the Muslim women, or should I simply observe their behavior or their argument in a common discussion or in a common platform, etc. So, methods of data collection, here in the research it involves the field study, and researchers should specify methods like, as I said, interview or questionnaire of the observation procedure he is planning to use while doing his research. Now, what is the methods of data collection? Some details should be provided, as such the method of distribution of questionnaire, the planned length of the interview, the geographical area of the study. So, if you want to pursue his research, if you want to collect the data with the help of questionnaire, if you want to plan the interview, what kind of interview it should be, whether he will going to ask the close-ended question, whether he give a chance to the interview to explain their opinion, or in what specific area he want to pursue his study, he want to continue his study. In this specific problem, we know that the area is already identified by the researcher, because he want to get the information only from the Muslim women post triple talaq judgment. So, in which area he want to pursue the study. So, the geographical area of study is also very important component when the researcher has to decide that what kind of a data he want to collect. Further, socio-cultural context of the study. So, in a social research, important task of the researcher is to take certain decision in a preliminary stage. Now, what are these decisions? Now, he has to be decide that the place where he want to conduct his study, the people or the type of person or a group about whom and from whom he want to collect the information, and then he has to be see that what are the various groups in society which might be distinguishable from each other by certain characteristics such as race, religion, languages, and maybe some distinct culture feature, etc. For example, the purpose of research is, if the purpose of the research is to find out the factors responsible for a higher incidence of poverty or a crime or illiteracy or divorce among certain group, then this should be specified in a research design. Now, this is very important. Then we have to be see what is the type of sample to be used. So, who will be the respondent with respect to whom and from whom the information is to be collected is an important aspect in research design. So, researcher has to be take a decision in respect of the criteria to be applied while selecting a sample, especially when interview or a questionnaire method is intended to be used. So, the age, the level of literacy, occupation, the marital status, the gender, these are some of the the basis often used in the information collection. So, however, who will be the respondent is determined by the purpose of the research, the type of the information needed, and the type of the relevant persons or the group. And then finally, the component of socio-legal research, it require the coding and analysis of the data. So, researcher has to be determined whether and what standardized editing and coding procedure he will use and how the data will be analyzed. So, sometime the researcher use the computer software, sometime the researcher manually do the tabulation of the data collected. So, the researcher should also specify what factor will be the basis of the analysis and what type of format the written report will be used. Now, we will discuss that what is the social survey research. Social survey research is a method which is involving the use of standardized questionnaires or interviews to collect the data about the people and their preferences. So, this method has since become very popular method for quantitative research in social sciences, and the survey method can be used for descriptive, for exploratory and explanatory research. This method is best suited for study that have individual peoples as the unit of analysis, and therefore, the social survey is an activity that collect information in an organized and in a methodologically manners about characteristics of the interest for some of the units or a population. So, what are the methods of data collection in survey? Variety of methods are used in a survey research. Interview methods, then the questionnaire methods, and so interview methods where this interview involves an interviewer, he is putting some question to the respondent and then recording their answers. So, the personal interview is widely used method in a social survey. The example for social survey is the exit poll. So, in exit poll, the different news channels they organize a survey, and in that survey what they did in that particular area, they asked the people about their inclination or the which political party have a chances to win, and on the basis of the data they collected from the some respondent. I mean, if the area has a population of 5,000, they might be choose 5% of the total population, maybe the 500 respondent, and the data which they collect, the information which they collect, on the basis of that they share the exit poll in their news channels. So, personal interviews are in many cases a very appropriate way of obtaining the cooperation of respondents, and many people are often more willing to speak face to face rather than giving answer on the telephone or maybe giving the recorded interviews. Questionnaire method contain the written question that people respond without aid of an interviewer. So, questionnaire can be either handed directly to the respondent or a group of people at the same time. Sometimes the researcher also share the the Google the questionnaire in a Google form. He shared that with his friends in a different groups, or sometime by mail or on internet to a number of people who then fill it out and return it to the researcher. So, researcher also collect the responses through the questionnaire. So, questionnaires are administered to a selected group of respondents. So, in both the methods, whether it is an interview or the questionnaire, the objective is to measure attitude, emotions, perceptions, the ideas and opinion held by the population which is subject matter of the survey. Use of sampling in survey, because the population which is intended to be studied is usually made up a large number of individuals, and it is practically impossible to question all of them by using the interview or questionnaire method. That's why the requirement is there that sample must be drawn on the basis of the certain precise rule, so that to reproduce on a small scale. So, the researcher choose a universe of study, and in that universe of study he will ask the question from the respondent, and on the basis of that the data is collected, and the data is collected is further interpreted by the researcher. So, we can say in conclusion that social science methodology largely depend upon the survey methods in its research endeavors, as it has advantage of wide scope to have a great deal of information with a large population. That is why the social survey method is a very popular among the socio-legal studies also. So, today's lecture we understand that what is a socio-legal research, what are the important ingredients of a socio-legal research, what are the components of the socio-legal research, and what are the different tools a researcher can use while he is pursuing the social survey methods. Thank you.